I'm Mia Garcia, 33 years old, an environmental attorney in Seattle. The lawsuit against OmniChem isn't just a milestone in my career, it's about my father, who died of cancer after years of working in their plant. From that day on, I swore no one else would suffer the same fate. But in that very case, Mark Covington, the man I once worshipped as a legend, betrayed me. He dumped tens of thousands of worthless pages in my lap and cut me out of the case, trading justice for OmniChem's power and money. What he never expected was that the real evidence lay in my late father's notes. Records of a banned chemical that poisoned the entire town of Riverbend, enough to turn a civil lawsuit into a criminal scandal. Among the victims is Evelyn Reed, my childhood best friend, and her 7-year-old niece, who is fighting leukemia with every breath. When I confronted him, Mark threatened to crush my career to leave me with nothing. But he was wrong. I'm not just fighting for justice. I'm fighting for my father, for Evelyn, for that little girl gasping for life. And for them, I'll burn to the ground the empire he and OmniChem built. This is no longer a lawsuit. This is a war of vengeance. The smell of old paper and stale coffee was the scent of my inheritance. It clung to the cardboard boxes stacked in my small Seattle apartment, a constant, tangible ghost of my father, Dr. Alejandro Garcia. He wasn't a man of wealth or property. His legacy was contained in these archives of meticulously labeled soil samples, water vials, and thousands of pages of handwritten notes. For most of my life, they were just Dad's dusty obsession. Now, they were my compass. My name is Mia Garcia. I'm 33 years old, and I'm an environmental lawyer, a path I chose because my father taught me that the earth doesn't have a voice, so it needs advocates. He spent 20 years being its voice in the field, and I was determined to be its voice in the courtroom. I was currently an associate at Sterling and Vance, one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms. It was the kind of place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, where the partners' shoes cost more than my first car. I'd landed a coveted spot on the team handling the biggest case of my career, the Riverbend Coalition versus OmniChem. It was a classic David and Goliath fight. Riverbend was a small, rural community 2 hours east of the city, a town where people had been getting sick for years. Cancers, respiratory illnesses, birth defects, a quiet plague they believed was seeping into their water from OmniChem's sprawling industrial plant on the edge of town. OmniChem, of course, was Goliath. A multi-billion-dollar corporation with a legal team that could blot out the sun. Our team was led by Mark Covington, a senior partner with a silver-tongued reputation and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was the reason I'd fought so hard to join this firm. He was legendary in environmental law, or so I thought. "Mia, glad you're here," Mark said, beckoning me into his corner office that morning. The view was breathtaking, but I always felt a chill in that room. Big day. OmniChem just dropped another 20,000 discovery documents on us. It's a classic stall tactic. Bury us in paperwork. I nodded, my legal pad ready. What's the strategy? Are we filing a motion to compel more specific disclosures? Mark chuckled, leaning back in his leather throne. Patience, eager beaver. We'll get there. For now, I need your sharp eyes on this, every page. I need you to cross-reference every invoice, every internal memo, every email against our existing evidence logs. It's tedious, I know, but it's the most important job right now. The devil is in the details, and you've got the best eye for detail of any associate I've ever had. It felt like a compliment, but there was an undertone I couldn't place. A dismissal. Of course, Mark, I'll get right on it. He slid a hard drive across his polished mahogany desk. This is your world for the next few weeks. I'm counting on you to find the needle in the haystack. The rest of the team will be prepping for depositions. I left his office with a knot tightening in my stomach. Reviewing discovery was a critical task, but this felt different. This felt like being sent to the basement while the real battle was being planned upstairs. Back in my small office, which was more of a cubicle with a door, I found Eleanor Vance, our team's senior paralegal, dropping a stack of files on my desk. Eleanor had been at the firm for 30 years, and she had a built-in lie detector that was more accurate than any machine. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with a severe haircut and an even more severe gaze. "New assignment from on high?" she asked, her voice dry as dust. "The OmniChem document dump." "Mark wants me to personally review all 20,000 pages," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. Eleanor just stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Mark Covington likes to keep his best people focused," she said, but the way she said it sounded like an insult. He told me to give you the geological surveys from the 90s for cross-referencing, said you'd know what to do with them. She tapped a thick, blue binder on the top of the stack. Good luck finding your needle. As she walked away, the knot in my stomach pulled tighter. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a world of digital paper. I worked 12, sometimes 14-hour days, my eyes burning from the screen's glare. I drank coffee until my hands shook. The documents were a mountain of nothing. Redacted emails, meaningless shipping manifests, safety reports that said everything was fine. It was exactly what Mark had called it, a stall tactic. But the more I read, the more I felt like I wasn't just being stalled by Omnichem. I was being stalled by my own team. One evening, Ben Carter, another associate who had started around the same time as me, poked his head into my office. His tie was loosened and he looked exhausted but exhilarated. "Mia, you're still here? I thought you'd be fossilized by now," he joked. "Almost," I mumbled, rubbing my temples. "How was the deposition prep?" "Intense. Mark is a machine. He's got their lead engineer cornered already. Found an inconsistency in his testimony from a hearing 3 years ago. It's amazing to watch him work. Has he mentioned the preliminary water toxicity reports? The ones from Dr. Massey's lab?" I asked. I had flagged them as crucial weeks ago, but I hadn't heard anything since. Ben frowned. "No, I don't think so. Mark said we're focusing the strategy on procedural violations for now. EPA reporting failures. He says it's a cleaner shot than trying to prove direct causation with the water tables. Less scientifically messy." "Less messy?" I sat up straight, the fatigue momentarily forgot. "Ben, people are dying. The water is the entire case. Not proving causation is the same as losing." "Hey, I get it," he said, raising his hands defensively. "But Mark's the expert. He's won cases twice this size. He knows what he's doing. We just have to trust the process." Trust the process. I hated that phrase. It was what people said when they wanted you to stop asking questions. After Ben left, I stared at the mountain of documents on my screen. This wasn't a strategy. This was a slow, methodical execution of our own case. Mark wasn't building an argument, he was building an alibi for our defeat. And he had put me, his so-called best eye for detail, in a room far away from the crime scene, tasked with cataloging the wallpaper. That night, I got a call from Evelyn Reed. She was the lead plaintiff, a retired schoolteacher from Riverbend who had lost her husband to lung cancer and now had a granddaughter battling leukemia. Her voice was frail but laced with steel. "Mia, dear, I'm sorry to call so late. I was just talking to some of the folks here. We heard the first depositions are next week. We're all praying for you." "We're working hard, Evelyn," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Mark is leading a strong prep. He's a very confident man, that Mr. Covington," she said, a hint of uncertainty in her tone. "When we first met him, he promised us he'd turn over every stone. He said he'd bring in experts from all over the country to prove what that poison factory did to our river." "And we will," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "I hope so, dear, because my granddaughter, little Chloe, she asked me today if the water made her sick. She's 7. What do I tell a 7-year-old child? I told her there were good people fighting to make it right." She paused, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "Please, Mia, tell me you're one of the good people." The call ended, but her words echoed in the silent office. Am I one of the good people? I looked at the meaningless work on my screen, at the imposing glass tower around me, at the career I had worked so hard to build, and I felt a profound sense of shame. I was a cog in a machine that was grinding toward a predetermined failure, and a 7-year-old girl was counting on me. That was the moment the knot of suspicion in my gut hardened into a cold, heavy certainty. Mark wasn't just being conservative, he was sabotaging the case. The question was why? Was it incompetence? No, Mark was brilliant. Was it fear of losing? No, he was arrogant. It had to be something else, something deliberate. I pushed away from my desk and walked to the window. The lights of Seattle glittered below, a sprawling, indifferent galaxy. I thought about my father. He never would have trusted the process. He would have made his own. He would have gone out, dug in the dirt with his own hands, and found the truth. My eyes fell on the blue binder Alina had given me, the geological surveys from the 90s. I had skimmed them, but I hadn't studied them. I opened it up. It was dense, filled with seismic data and soil composition charts. But tucked into a pocket in the back was a folded, faded piece of paper. It was a map of the Riverbend area, but it wasn't a standard geological survey map. It was topographical, and it was covered in my father's unmistakable, spidery handwriting. He had marked dozens of locations along the riverbank and downstream from the Omnichem plant. Next to the markings were dates from about 15 years ago and chemical notations I didn't recognize. My heart started to pound. My father had been here. He had been researching this exact area years before the lawsuit ever existed. Why? What had he found? I packed the binder into my briefcase, my hands trembling slightly. I logged off my computer, the 20,000 documents left unread. They were a distraction, a ghost. The real evidence wasn't on a hard drive in a corporate law office. It was waiting for me in the dusty cardboard boxes that held my father's legacy. As I walked out of the silent, imposing building and into the cool night air, I felt a shift inside me. I was no longer an associate following orders. I was a daughter seeking justice, and I would find it not in their files but in his. The fight for Riverbend had just become deeply, irrevocably personal. My apartment, usually a sanctuary from the high-stress world of corporate law, transformed into a makeshift laboratory and war room. The boxes I had dutifully moved from my father's house after his passing, the ones I'd been meaning to put into storage, were now the centerpiece of my life. I spent the entire weekend immersed in his work, the scent of aging paper and dried earth filling my small space. It felt like a conversation with him across time. His notes were a flurry of scientific data mixed with personal observations. Soil pH is dropping faster than anticipated downstream from the discharge pipe. The alders are showing signs of chemical burn, one entry read. Another, more personal, saw a family of deer by the water today. They looked thin, thinner than last year. Am I imagining it? He wasn't imagining it. He was documenting a slow death. I cross-referenced his hand-drawn map with the official geological surveys Aliner had given me. His markings were precise, focused on areas the official surveys had conveniently glossed over, small tributaries, drainage ditches, and patches of wetland that acted like sponges for whatever OmniChem was leaching into the ground. It was in a journal from 2008 that I found the first real clue. A page was filled with gas chromatography readings, complex molecular diagrams sketched in the margins. And next to one distinct peak in the data, he had scrawled a note in red ink, unknown compound. Signature doesn't match anything on the EPA's priority pollutant list. Highly stable, bioaccumulative. I'm calling it ZC12 for now. Where is this coming from? ZC12. The term appeared again and again over the next few years of his research. He'd tracked its concentration, noting its presence in soil, in river sediment, and in the tissue of fish he'd dissected. It was the ghost in the machine, the variable nobody else was looking for. I spent hours searching online chemical databases, legal precedents, and scientific journals. Nothing. ZC12 didn't officially exist. It was my father's private name for a public poison. I was a good lawyer, but I was in over my head on the science. I needed someone who could speak my father's language. Leafing through his oldest journal, I found a name mentioned frequently with admiration, Dr. Eris Thorne. Dad had described him as my brightest student, a bulldog with a microscope. A quick search revealed that Dr. Thorne was now a tenured professor of toxicology at the University of Washington, ironically, my alma mater. I sent him a carefully worded email mentioning my father and a matter of complex environmental science I needed help with. He agreed to meet the next day. Dr. Thorne's office was the polar opposite of Mark Covington's. It was a chaotic, cramped space overflowing with books and precariously stacked journals, a whiteboard covered in equations that looked like a foreign language. He was a man in his late 40s, with a perpetually tired expression, a rumpled tweed jacket, and a cynicism that seemed to radiate from him like heat. "Ms. Garcia," he said, gesturing to a chair piled with papers, which he unceremoniously dumped onto the floor. "Your father was a great man, a true field scientist. The world has too few of them these days. So what's this all about? You're with Sterling and Vance, your email said. Big time." "I'm on the OmniChem case," I began. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "OmniChem, of course. The case everyone in my field knows is a slam dunk scientifically but a guaranteed loser legally. Let me guess, they've buried you in discovery, and their army of expert witnesses is busy writing fiction about how their plant actually purifies the water." "Something like that," I admitted, "but I think my father found something they missed, something everyone missed." I laid out my father's map and the journal entry on his cluttered desk. I pointed to the words scrawled in red ink. "He found a compound he called ZC12. I can't find it in any official registry. I was hoping you might recognize the molecular structure he sketched." Eris leaned forward, his tired eyes scanning the page. For a moment, he was silent. Then he slowly sat back in his chair, the cynicism on his face replaced by a look of utter shock. He looked from the journal to me and back again. "My God," he whispered, Alejandro actually found it. Found what? What is ZC-12? It's not its real name, that was your dad's shorthand. Its official designation is proprietary. It's a chemical catalyst. A fixer. It makes their other chemical processes cheaper and faster. It's also one of the most toxic, non-degrading substances I have ever studied, he said, his voice low and intense. OmniChem developed it in their European labs 25 years ago. It was so carcinogenic that the EU banned it before it ever went into production. OmniChem swore on a stack of Bibles that the formula was destroyed and that it was never, ever used in their North American operations. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying snap. They're not just hiding pollution, I said, my blood running cold. They're hiding the existence of a banned, proprietary chemical they promised they never used. That's why none of the standard tests are picking it up. We're all looking for the wrong thing. Exactly, Eris said. Your regular environmental testing looks for a specific list of known pollutants. It's like looking for a suspect by checking for a driver's license, but this guy doesn't have one. He's a ghost. If you could prove they are using ZC-12 and that it's in the Riverbend water, this wouldn't just be a civil liability case, Mia. This would be massive criminal fraud. Suddenly, Mark's strategy made perfect, sickening sense. He wasn't trying to win on procedural errors. He was deliberately avoiding the core scientific evidence because he knew what was there. He wasn't just throwing the case. He was helping OmniChem keep its darkest secret buried. An agreement like that, a betrayal of that magnitude, it had to be worth millions. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Need you in my office at 8 a.m. sharp tomorrow. We're revising our witness list. I felt a jolt of fear. He was pulling the strings, and I was just now starting to see the wires. I have to go, I said to Eris, gathering my father's papers. Can you help me? I need to know how to test for this. I need irrefutable proof. Eris's fatigue was gone, replaced by a fire I recognized from my father. Help you? Mia, your father was my mentor. He spent the last years of his life chasing this ghost. This is just your fight anymore. He scribbled on a notepad. This is a list of equipment you'll need, and you'll need fresh samples. Soil, water, sediment, from the locations your father marked. Don't use any of the official evidence chain samples the firm has. Assume they're compromised. Get the samples yourself and bring them to my private lab. We'll run the tests off the books. I returned to the office the next morning feeling like a spy in enemy territory. Every smile, every good morning felt like a threat. I walked into Mark's office, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mia, come in, he said, smiling that cold, polished smile. Incredible work on that document review. Truly. You've saved the team hundreds of hours. I'm officially reassigning you. I want you to start drafting the preliminary settlement offer. It was a punch to the gut. A settlement offer? We hadn't even finished depositions. We were surrendering before the first battle. A settlement offer? I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Mark, we haven't even presented our primary evidence. We have a strong case. We have a sympathetic case, Mia. We don't have a winning one, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. OmniChem's lawyers will bury us in scientific appeals for the next 10 years. The people of Riverbend will be dead before they see a dime. A settlement gets them some money, some closure, and we all move on. It's the responsible thing to do. I need you to draft a proposal. Focus on medical expense reimbursement and a small community fund. Nothing punitive. Keep it reasonable. He was handing me the shovel to bury our own case. I had to play along. I understand. I'll get started. As I turned to leave, he added, and Mia, stick to the financials. Leave the scientific arguments to the experts. We don't want to muddy the waters. The threat was clear. Stay in your lane. Don't look at the water. Walking back to my desk, my mind was racing. I needed a way to get to Riverbend without raising suspicion. I needed an alibi. As I passed Alina's desk, she looked up at me, her gaze sharp. She'd seen me walk out of Mark's office. She knew what a settlement offer at this stage meant. My sister in Portland is sick, she said suddenly, her voice low and flat though she wasn't looking at me. Might have to take a personal day on Friday to drive down and see her. The flu is going around something fierce this year. I stopped, confused. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Alina. She finally met my eyes and there was a flicker of something in them, a warning and instruction. Yes, a terrible, contagious flu. The kind that keeps people out of the office for a whole day. You should be careful, Mia. You look a little pale yourself. I understood. She was giving me an out, a reason to disappear on Friday. She was on my side. She didn't know the details, but she knew something was rotten. I nodded slowly. Thanks, Alina. I'll be sure to drink plenty of orange juice. That Friday, I would call in sick. I would drive to Riverbend. I would follow my father's map. And I would bring back the proof that would not just win a lawsuit, but expose a conspiracy that went all the way to the top of my own firm. The risk was immense. If I was caught, my career would be over. But when I thought of Evelyn's 7-year-old granddaughter, I knew it wasn't a choice. It was an obligation. Friday morning, the lie came easily. I called the office, my voice raspy and pathetic, complaining of a fever and chills. I could almost feel Mark's satisfaction through the phone. Keeping me at home, sick and isolated, was probably his ideal scenario. He likely imagined me quarantined with my laptop, dutifully drafting the surrender document he'd assigned me. He couldn't have been more wrong. The 2-hour drive to Riverbend was a journey from the steel and glass canyons of Seattle to the wounded heart of rural Washington. The landscape changed from manicured suburbs to sprawling farmland, then to the dense, dark green of the Cascade foothills. Riverbend wasn't so much a town as a scattering of houses and small businesses huddled along the banks of the Skycomish River, all of it shadowed by the looming, rust-colored silhouette of the OmniChem plant. Steam billowed from its smokestacks, a constant, ugly breath against the crisp blue sky. Even from a distance, the place felt oppressive. I parked my car at a public fishing access point, out of sight from the main road. I changed out of my city clothes and into hiking boots, durable cargo pants, and a worn flannel shirt that had been my father's. In my backpack, I had the essentials Eris had listed: a handheld GPS, dozens of sterilized glass vials for water and soil, latex gloves, a small shovel, and a cooler with ice packs to preserve the samples. And of course, my father's laminated map. Following his precise markings, I felt a strange sense of walking in his footsteps. The first location was a small, unnamed creek that fed into the river, just a quarter-mile downstream from OmniChem's primary discharge pipe. The area was fenced off with faded no trespassing signs, but the fence was old and a section of it had been crushed by a fallen tree. It was easy enough to slip through. The air here was different. It was thick with a faint, acrid smell, like burnt plastic and wet metal. The creek bed, which should have been teeming with life, was eerily silent. The rocks were coated in a slimy, rainbow-colored film, and the banks were barren mud where grass and ferns should have been growing. It was a dead zone. I pulled on my gloves, my stomach churning. Using the GPS to pinpoint the exact coordinates my father had marked 15 years earlier, I knelt down. I scraped away the top layer of silt and dug into the dark, wet earth beneath. The soil was unnaturally dense and smelled foul. I filled 3 vials, labeling them meticulously with the date, time, and coordinates. Then I collected a water sample from the slow-moving creek. Even through the glass, I could see it was cloudy with an oily sheen. As I was sealing the last vial, I heard a sound, the snap of a twig. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I crouched behind a thicket of blackberry bushes, peering through the leaves. A man in a battered pickup truck was driving slowly along the plant's perimeter road, his window down. He wore an OmniChem security uniform. He stopped the truck not 50 feet from where I was hiding, got out, and scanned the fence line. For a terrifying minute, I thought he'd seen the broken section. But after a moment, he just lit a cigarette, leaned against his truck, and stared out at the dead creek. There was no vigilance in his posture, only a profound weariness. He wasn't looking for intruders, he was just taking a smoke break in a place nobody else would ever come. After he finished, he ground the butt into the dirt, got back in his truck, and drove off. I waited until the sound of the engine faded completely, my breath held tight in my chest. This was more dangerous than I had anticipated. I spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened alert, moving like a ghost through the woods and along the riverbank. I took samples from 6 other locations my father had identified: a marshy wetland that acted as a natural filter, a deeper section of the river where sediment collected, even from the soil in a small public park at the edge of town. Each location told the same story of sickness and decay. The last site on my list was the most personal. It was marked simply, ER well. I knew it had to be Evelyn Reed's property. Her house was a small, neat farmhouse set back from the road, with a well-tended garden that was now turning brown for the fall. I felt a pang of guilt for trespassing, but I knew she would understand if she knew why. I circled around the back, staying in the cover of the trees, until I found the old stone well house. It looked ancient. I collected a water sample directly from the pump, the same water her family had been drinking for generations. The same water 7-year-old Chloe drank every day. Holding the vial up to the fading afternoon light, it looked clear, deceptively clear. With my cooler full of carefully labeled samples, I made the tense drive back to Seattle. I didn't go to my apartment. I drove straight to the university, texting Eris that I was on my way. He met me at a back entrance to the science building, leading me through a labyrinth of empty hallways to his private lab. It was a small, state-of-the-art facility, paid for by a research grant that gave him a degree of autonomy. "Did you have any trouble?" he asked, his eyes scanning me for any sign of distress. "Almost ran into a security guard, but I got them, all 7 locations." He nodded, all business now. "Good, let's see what your father's ghost has to tell us." For the next several hours, I watched a master at work. Eris moved with a focused, efficient grace, preparing the samples, calibrating the complex machinery. The centerpiece of the lab was a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, a machine, he explained, that could separate a substance into its individual components and identify each one by its unique molecular weight, its chemical fingerprint. "It's the only way to find something when you don't know what you're looking for," he said, injecting the first sample from the dead creek into the machine. "We're not asking it, is ZC-12 here? We're asking it, show us everything that's here." We waited. The machine hummed and whirred. On the computer screen connected to it, a graph began to form. A flat line that slowly erupted into a series of peaks, each one representing a different chemical compound detected in the sample. There were peaks for common minerals, for agricultural runoff, for trace elements found naturally in the river. And then it appeared. A tall, sharp spike in a section of the graph where nothing should have been. It was identical to the one my father had drawn in his journal all those years ago. Eris leaned in close to the screen, his breath fogging the glass for a second. "There you are, you son of a bitch," he whispered. He clicked his mouse, and the machine cross-referenced the peak's mass-to-charge ratio with its extensive library. The result flashed on the screen, no match found. "It's an unregistered compound," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's ZC-12, he corrected me. He ran the sample from the park. The same peak appeared, smaller but still undeniably present. He ran the sample from the marsh. The peak was even larger, the toxins concentrated in the wetland. One by one, he tested every sample I had brought back, and one by one, the ghost appeared. Finally, he loaded the last vial, the water from Evelyn Reed's well. We both held our breath as the graph began to form. The background noise was much lower, well water was naturally more filtered, the line was almost flat, and then there it was. A small but sharp, perfect peak. The poison was in her drinking water. It was in Chloe's cup. A cold, hard fury unlike anything I had ever felt washed over me. This wasn't just corporate negligence anymore. This was a sustained, deliberate poisoning of a community, hidden by lies and legal maneuvering. "We've got them," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "This is the smoking gun, Mia," Eris said, printing out the results. He stamped each page with the date, time, and his signature. "This data is scientifically irrefutable, but a good lawyer can create doubt around anything. OmniChem's team will say the samples were contaminated. They'll attack my methodology. They'll attack you. They'll attack your father's memory. So what do we do?" He looked me straight in the eye. "Now you do what you do best. You be a lawyer. We have the science. You need to build a chain of evidence so strong, so airtight that no one can tear it down, and you need to find out how deep the rot goes at your firm." I left his lab close to midnight, the damning printouts clutched in my hand. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. "Just reviewed your draft settlement. Good start. We'll present it to OmniChem's counsel on Monday. Thanks for your hard work." He was moving fast. He was trying to kill the case before I could do anything. I now had the proof to stop him. But Eris was right. It wasn't enough. I needed more than just the science. I needed to prove the conspiracy. I needed to prove Mark Covington, my boss and mentor, was a willing participant in OmniChem's crimes, and I had a terrifying idea of how to do it. It would involve betrayal, deception, and a risk that could not only end my career, but could also potentially land me in jail. But the image of that small, sharp peak from Evelyn's well water burned in my mind. The time for caution was over. Monday morning felt like walking onto a stage for a play where only I knew the script was about to be completely rewritten. I walked into Sterling and Vance with a forced calm, the printouts from Eris's lab safely stored on a secure cloud server, the originals hidden in a safe deposit box I had rented under my mother's maiden name. In my briefcase, I carried a small, high-fidelity digital audio recorder. The plan I had conceived was reckless, a Hail Mary pass in the final seconds of the game, and its success depended entirely on Mark Covington's arrogance. I spent the first few hours of the morning making a show of finalizing the settlement proposal. I printed out copies, bound them in official-looking blue covers, and hand-delivered one to Ben Carter. "Here's the draft for the settlement," I said, my voice bright and professional. "Mark wants to present it this afternoon." Ben took the document, his expression a mixture of relief and disappointment. "So that's it then? We're really not going to trial?" "Mark thinks it's for the best," I said, echoing the company line. "Get the clients some compensation now instead of maybe getting more in a decade." "I guess," he sighed. "It just feels anticlimactic. I really thought we were going to nail them." "Me too," I said, letting a hint of genuine frustration seep into my voice. "Honestly, Ben, I'm struggling with this. The science seems so strong. I keep thinking we're missing something." "Well, if you are, Mark is. He's been in meetings with OmniChem's lead counsel, Robert Thorne, for the past 2 weeks, probably hammering out the framework for this deal behind the scenes." My ears perked up. "Robert Thorne, are you sure? I thought their lead counsel was a woman from their New York office." "It was, but they brought in Thorne a few weeks ago. He's a specialist, known for making difficult cases go away quietly. Mark has a lot of respect for him, says they speak the same language." Ben lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I think they're old friends. I saw them having a drink at the Met last week. Looked pretty chummy for opposing counsel." The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. A specialist, an old friend. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a reunion. I returned to my office, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm. I needed to get Mark on tape. I needed him to admit he was burying the case, and I needed to know why. Before going to his office, I stopped by Eliner's desk. "Eliner, can I ask you for a huge favor?" I whispered. "I need you to call Mark's office in exactly 10 minutes. Tell his assistant it's an urgent call from the court clerk regarding the Harrison case. It's important. Just create a distraction." Eliner looked at me, her face impassive, but her eyes held a spark of understanding. She didn't ask why. She simply gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. I walked to Mark's office and knocked on the door. "Mark, do you have a minute to go over the final settlement numbers? I have a question about the compensation cap." "Come in, Mia," he said, looking up from his computer. He was in a good mood, the triumphant look of a general who thinks he's already won the war. "What's the issue?" I sat down, placing my briefcase on the floor beside my chair. I clicked the nearly silent button on the recorder inside. "It's not an issue, exactly. It's just I was running the projections, and the amount we're proposing, it barely covers the existing medical bills for the plaintiffs. It doesn't account for future care at all. For kids like Chloe Reed, her lifetime medical costs could be in the millions." Mark's smile tightened. "This isn't about making them whole, Mia. That's a fantasy. This is about damage control. We get them a number OmniChem is willing to pay, and we close the file. It's business." "But is it justice?" I pressed, my voice full of practiced naivety. "I became an environmental lawyer because of you, Mark. I read about the Westgate mining case you won. You didn't settle. You fought them for 6 years and you crushed them. You said that some things are more important than a quick payout." His ego flared, just as I'd hoped. Westgate was different. We had a slam-dunk case. The evidence was undeniable. "And this is," I challenged. "Mark, what if I told you OmniChem wasn't just leaking permitted chemicals? What if I told you they were using a banned, unregistered catalyst, something so toxic it was outlawed in Europe decades ago? And what if I told you I had proof?" The mask of civility dropped from his face. The friendly mentor was gone, replaced by a cold, dangerous stranger. His eyes narrowed. "Where did you hear that?" His voice was low, menacing. "I've been looking through my father's old research," I said, feigning nervousness. "He worked in that area years ago. He found something he called ZC12. He tracked it, logged its concentration. It's all there in his notes." Mark stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. For a long moment, he was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the city traffic below. "Your father was a brilliant man," he said finally, his voice dangerously soft. "He was also a zealot. He saw conspiracies where there were only unfortunate coincidences. This ZC12, it's a fantasy. A ghost he chased for years. It will be dismissed as junk science in court, and it will destroy what little credibility our case has left. You need to drop this, Mia, for the good of the clients, and for the good of your career." "But what if it's not junk science?" I pushed, my heart hammering. "What if we can prove it? Wouldn't that change everything?" "It wouldn't just be a civil case anymore. It would be criminal fraud." He turned around slowly, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "There is nothing to prove. OmniChem's internal audits are flawless. Their compliance record is perfect. Robert Thorne has assured me of that personally." "Robert Thorne," I repeated. "Ben mentioned you two were friends." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "We have a professional relationship. He's a reasonable man." He and his client are prepared to be generous to put this unfortunate matter behind them. A generosity, I might add, that extends to this firm. A successful, quiet settlement strengthens our relationship with a major corporate player. A noisy, failed trial based on the ramblings of a dead scientist does not. That was it. It wasn't just about a kickback for him. It was about positioning the firm, about currying favor with a corporate giant. The clients in Riverbend were just pawns in a much larger game. Just then his intercom buzzed. It was his assistant. "Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the clerk for Judge Albright is on line 1. He said it's urgent regarding the Harrison pretrial motions." "Tell him I'll call him back," Mark snapped. "He said he needs to speak with you now, sir. He said the deadline is noon." Mark shot me a look of pure fury, his frustration boiling over. "Fine." He jabbed the button for the speakerphone. "This is Covington." As he was distracted by the call, a brilliant, lengthy series of procedural questions fed to the clerk by a leaner, my eyes darted around his office. I was looking for anything to corroborate what I now knew. My gaze landed on his desk, specifically on a high-end leather briefcase I didn't recognize. It was sitting next to his own. It had to be Robert Thorne. Ben had said they were meeting constantly. Perhaps he had just left. Poking out of the side pocket was a flash of yellow, a legal pad, and on it in clear handwriting I could see a list of names. My name was on it. Next to my name was the notation, "Garcia daughter potential PR risk, contain." My blood ran cold. Contain, that's what I was to them. A problem to be managed. Below my name was a list of our plaintiffs, and next to Evelyn Reed's name was a chilling, handwritten note, "Offer supplemental compassion payment direct to family. NDN. Isolate from group. NDN, non-disclosure and non-disparagement." They were trying to buy her silence, to peel her away from the other plaintiffs, to break the coalition apart from the inside. As Mark argued with the clerk, I took out my phone. With trembling hands, I angled it just right and took a clear, high-resolution photo of the legal pad. The evidence of their conspiracy, right there in Thorne's own handwriting. Mark slammed the phone down. "Damn procedural nonsense," he muttered. He turned his attention back to me, his composure regained. "Mia, I'm going to be very clear. Your father's work stays in its boxes. You will not mention ZC-12 to anyone. Not to the clients, not to the other associates, not to the press. You will focus on finalizing this settlement, and you will do it well. Is that understood?" "And if I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He walked over to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was my resume. "You are a brilliant young lawyer, Mia. You have a bright future ahead of you. It would be a shame to see you blacklisted from every reputable firm in the country before you even turn 35. I have friends everywhere. A word from me, a suggestion that you're unstable, that you're chasing fantasies and violating client trust, and you'll be lucky to get a job drafting wills in a strip mall. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" It was a threat, plain and simple. My career in exchange for my silence. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "I understand perfectly." I walked out of his office, the recorder still running in my briefcase, the photo of the legal pad burning a hole in my phone's memory. I had it all. The scientific proof, the confession on tape, and the written evidence of their strategy. I had the gun, the bullets, and the fingerprints. Now all I had to do was pull the trigger. The walk from Mark's office back to my cubicle was the longest journey of my life. Every colleague I passed, every polite smile and nod, felt like a scene from a movie where the protagonist knows a bomb is about to go off. I felt dangerously exposed, as if the evidence I carried was physically glowing, visible to everyone. I got back to my office, shut the door, and leaned against it, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I took a deep breath, forcing the adrenaline to subside, and began to move with methodical precision. There was no room for error. First, I transferred the audio file from the digital recorder and the photo from my phone to the same secure cloud server where I had stored Eris's lab results. I created 3 encrypted copies and emailed the access keys to my personal, non-work account to Eris and to a private email address I had created for Evelyn Reed, along with a simple instruction. "Do not open unless you hear from me that it's time, or if you don't hear from me at all for more than 48 hours. It was a dead man's switch, a small piece of insurance in a game with impossibly high stakes. Next, I called a leaner. "I'm taking a late lunch," I said, my voice low. "Meet me in 20 minutes, the coffee shop on the corner of 4th and Madison, the one with the upstairs seating." "I'll be there," she said, her tone telling me she understood this was not a social invitation. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a secluded corner booth upstairs, a steaming mug of tea untouched in front of me. Elena arrived, her face as stoic as ever, and sat down. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What's happened, Mia?" I took a shaky breath and laid it all out. My father's research, ZC-12, the secret tests with Eris Thorne, and the conversation I had just recorded in Mark's office. I told her about the legal pad, about the plan to isolate Evelyn, about Mark's threat to ruin my career. I spoke in a hushed, urgent whisper, and as I did, I saw something rare on Eleanor's face, a slow-burning fire of righteous anger. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, her shrewd eyes studying my face. "I knew it," she said, her voice tight with fury. "I've worked with Mark Covington for 15 years, I've seen him bend the rules, I've seen him cut corners, but this is monstrous, betraying his own clients for a corporate partnership." She shook her head. "That man has no soul. I have the evidence, Eleanor, all of it, but I don't know what to do next. If I go to the managing partner, Mark will deny everything. He'll paint me as a disgruntled associate. If I go to the press, I'll be disbarred for breaking client privilege. I'm trapped." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "You're not trapped, you're armed, but you can't fire the first shot. You'll be the immediate casualty. We need to get this evidence in front of someone who has the power to act on it but who isn't part of Mark's inner circle. Someone whose integrity is beyond question." "Who?" "Judge Alastair Finch," she said without hesitation. "He's the presiding judge on the Omni Chem case. I've known him for 20 years. He's tough, old school, and he despises corporate lawyers who play dirty. He has zero tolerance for misconduct. If we can get this to him, he'll burn Mark and Omni Chem to the ground." "But how? We can't just send him an anonymous email. It's an improper ex parte communication. He'd have to report it and it would be dismissed." "We're not going to send it to him," Eleanor said, a cunning light in her eyes. "You are, in open court." The plan she laid out was audacious, terrifying, and brilliant. It was a legal Trojan horse. The next day, I was scheduled to file a routine motion to extend the discovery deadline, a motion Mark had told me to file to maintain the illusion that we were still working the case. Eleanor's plan was to turn this mundane administrative filing into the most explosive courtroom moment of my life. "You're going to file the motion as planned," she explained, "but you're also going to attach a sealed exhibit to the motion. The exhibit will be a sworn affidavit from you. In that affidavit, you will detail everything you've told me. You will cite the evidence you have, the lab results, the audio recording, the photograph. You will state that you have reason to believe that the lead counsel for the plaintiffs is conspiring with the defense to deliberately lose the case, committing fraud upon the court. You will request that the judge review the evidence in camera, privately, in his chambers, to determine if a crime has been committed." It was a loophole. By filing it as a sworn affidavit attached to a formal motion, it wasn't an improper communication. It was official court business. Mark wouldn't know what was in the sealed exhibit until it was too late. Judge Finch would be legally obligated to review it. "He'll destroy me," I breathed, the sheer audacity of it taking my breath away. "The moment Mark finds out, he'll have me fired and disbarred." "Yes, he will try," Eleanor said calmly, "which is why timing is everything. I will file the motion electronically at exactly 4:59 p.m. tomorrow. The court clerk's office will be closed. Mark will get an automatic notification, but he won't be able to see the sealed exhibit until the clerk processes it the next morning. That gives us a window. It gives the judge the night to review your affidavit. By the time Mark Covington walks into his office on Wednesday morning, his fate will already have been decided by a federal judge." The rest of the day and into the night was a blur of frantic, secret activity. I went back to my apartment and drafted the most important document of my life. My hands shook as I typed, but my mind was clear. I laid out the timeline, the discovery of my father's work, the independent verification by Dr. Thorne. I transcribed the key parts of my conversation with Mark, referencing the audio file. I included the photo of Thorne's legal pad. I described the threat to my career and the plan to systematically dismantle the plaintiff's case. I signed it under penalty of perjury. At dawn, I met Eleanor in a 24-hour diner. We looked like a pair of conspirators, which I suppose we were. She reviewed the affidavit, her sharp eyes missing nothing, suggesting a few changes to the legal phrasing to make it even more potent. "This is your Declaration of Independence, Mia," she said, handing it back to me. "You know there's no going back after this, right?" "I know," I said, my voice steady. "If I did nothing, I wouldn't be able to live with myself." Back at the office that Tuesday, I felt a strange sense of calm. The decision was made, the die was cast. I avoided Mark, keeping my head down and pretending to work on the settlement. Ben stopped by my desk, looking concerned. "Are you okay, Mia? You seem distant." "Just tired," I lied. "Big week." I felt a pang of guilt. Ben was a good person, caught in the middle of a war he didn't even know was being fought. At 4:55 p.m., I walked to Alina's desk. I handed her a thumb drive containing the motion and the sealed affidavit. We didn't say a word. Our eyes met, and in that silent glance, a bond of trust and shared risk was forged. I went back to my office, packed my personal belongings into a small box, and sat at my desk, watching the clock on my computer screen. 4:58. My breath caught in my chest. 4:59. Alina would be hitting send right now. The email notification would be flying through the digital ether, landing in Mark's inbox, in Robert Thorne's inbox, and on the court server. A silent digital declaration of war. 5:00. I stood up, took my box, and walked out of my office. I didn't look back. As I passed Mark's corner office, I could see him through the glass wall. He was on the phone, laughing about something, completely oblivious. The sight filled me not with triumph, but with a profound sadness for the man he could have been, for the principles he had so thoroughly betrayed. I rode the elevator down to the lobby, my reflection a pale, determined stranger in the polished brass doors. When I stepped out onto the street, the cool Seattle air felt like the first breath of a new life. I didn't know if I would have a career, or a law license, or a future in the city I called home by the end of the week. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly one of the good people. I had told the truth. Now it was up to the system I had dedicated my life to deliver justice, and all I could do was wait. Waiting was a unique form of torture. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by my father's boxes, and felt the crushing weight of what I had done. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my own life, and I could only wait for the fallout. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I imagined Mark's fury when he opened the attachment in the morning. I pictured the managing partners of Sterling and Vance convening an emergency meeting, their voices low and venomous as they discussed the rogue associate who had betrayed them. At 7 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. My blood ran cold. I answered, my hand trembling. "Ms. Garcia." The voice was deep, formal, and unfamiliar. "This is Officer Miller with the United States Marshals Service. I'm calling on behalf of Judge Alastair Finch. The judge has reviewed your submitted affidavit. He has issued a temporary gag order on all parties related to the case of the Riverbend Coalition versus OmniChem. You are not to speak to anyone about this matter. He has also issued a subpoena for you to provide testimony in his chambers. A car will be at your apartment building to collect you in 1 hour. Do you understand?" "Yes," I managed to choke out. "Yes, I understand." The line went dead. It was happening, and it was happening faster than I could have imagined. Judge Finch wasn't waiting. He was acting. An hour later, a black sedan with government plates was waiting for me. The ride to the federal courthouse was silent and surreal. I was escorted through a private entrance, bypassing the main security lines, and led down a quiet, wood-paneled hallway to the judge's chambers. Judge Finch's chambers were imposing, lined with law books from floor to ceiling. He was an older man, with a shock of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He sat behind a massive oak desk, and he did not look pleased. Standing beside him were two people I didn't recognize, a man and a woman in severe business suits. "Ms. Garcia," the judge began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very air in the room. "I have read your affidavit. These are extraordinary accusations, the most serious a lawyer can make. You have accused a senior partner at your firm, an officer of my court, of conspiring to commit fraud. You realize that if these allegations are found to be baseless, your career is not only over, you will be facing disbarment and potential criminal charges for perjury." "I do, Your Honor," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "And you stand by every word in this document?" "I do, Your Honor, and I have the evidence to prove it." He gestured to the two people beside him. "This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Helen Cho and Special Agent David Chen from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. They will be taking your formal statement. I want you to tell them everything. Hold nothing back." For the next 3 hours, I recounted the entire story. I gave them the access keys to the secure server containing the lab results, the audio recording, and the photograph. Agent Chen downloaded the files, his face an unreadable mask of professionalism. AUSHO asked sharp, incisive questions, probing for any weakness, any inconsistency in my story. It was the most grueling examination of my life, but I had the truth on my side. As they were finishing, there was a knock on the chamber door. A court clerk entered and handed a note to Judge Finch. He read it, and a look of grim satisfaction settled on his face. "It seems," he said, looking at me, "that Mr. Covington and Mr. Thorne have arrived for their scheduled status conference. Let's not keep them waiting." The scene that followed in the courtroom will be forever seared into my memory. It was a closed session. No public, no press. Just the judge, the government lawyers, me, and the legal teams for both sides. I was seated at a small table separate from everyone else. Mark and Robert Thorne strode in, looking confident and powerful. Mark shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. If looks could kill, I would have been dust on the courtroom floor. He clearly thought this was his moment to destroy me. "Your Honor," Mark began, his voice dripping with outrage before the judge could even speak. "I apologize for my associates' unconscionable behavior. This is a shocking and baseless attack, a desperate cry for attention from a junior lawyer who is clearly unstable. I will be seeking her immediate termination and will be filing a complaint with the State Bar this afternoon." Judge Finch let him finish, his face impassive. Then he leaned forward, and his voice, though quiet, filled the room with menace. "Mr. Covington, sit down and be silent. You will speak only when I permit you to speak, and I assure you that time is a long way off." Mark's face went pale. He sat down abruptly. The judge continued. "I have reviewed a sealed affidavit filed by Ms. Garcia. I have also reviewed the preliminary evidence she has provided, and I have listened to a rather fascinating audio recording." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He looked directly at Mark. "A recording of a conversation that took place in your office on Monday afternoon. A conversation in which you threatened to blacklist Ms. Garcia if she did not help you bury this case." The color drained completely from Mark's face. He looked like he had been physically struck. Robert Thorne, beside him, was a statue of ice, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Furthermore," the judge went on, his voice rising with controlled fury, "I have been made aware of a chemical compound known as ZC-12, a substance allegedly banned in the European Union, which has been found in the water supply of the community of Riverbend. A substance your client, Mr. Thorne, has sworn under oath was never used in its North American facilities." He turned his gaze to Thorne, whose composure finally cracked. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. "And finally," Judge Finch said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I have seen a photograph of a legal pad. On that pad is a handwritten strategy to contain Ms. Garcia and to offer a compassion payment and an NDA to the lead plaintiff to isolate her from the group. Mr. Thorne, does that handwriting happen to be yours?" The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the sound of two high-powered careers imploding at once. Judge Finch stood up, his towering presence dominating the room. "This is no longer a civil matter. I am staying all proceedings in this case, effective immediately. I am referring this entire matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for a full criminal investigation into conspiracy, fraud, and perjury. Special Agent Chen, you will escort Mr. Covington and Mr. Thorne to a conference room where you will take their statements. They will not be leaving this building until you are finished with them. Their electronic devices are to be confiscated immediately." Two FBI agents who had been standing discreetly at the back of the courtroom moved forward. Mark Covington looked utterly broken. As he was led away, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no hatred left in them, only a hollow, cavernous shock. The look of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had just now realized his wings were made of wax. After they were gone, the courtroom was quiet. Judge Finch looked at me, his expression softening for the first time. "Ms. Garcia," he said, "you have taken a great personal and professional risk to uphold the integrity of this court and the rule of law. What you did took a rare form of courage. You should be proud." I could only nod, a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees washing over me. "Now," he continued, "the people of Riverbend are without legal representation. I believe we should remedy that." He looked at AUSHO. "I think it's fair to say that Sterling and Vance has a conflict of interest at this point. Ms. Cho, I want your office to file a motion to have the firm and all its assets frozen pending the outcome of your investigation. We need to make sure there are funds available for the victims when the dust settles." He turned back to me. "As for you, Ms. Garcia, you are no longer an associate at that firm. You're a key witness in a federal criminal investigation. Go home, get some rest. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be in touch." I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. It felt like I was seeing the world for the first time. The bomb had gone off and the villains had been vanquished. But the battle was far from over. The real fight, the fight for the people of Riverbend, had only just begun. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would be the one to lead it. I was no longer just my father's daughter. I was his legacy. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The story of the courageous young lawyer who brought down her own firm and a corporate giant became a national sensation. My face was on the news, my name in the headlines. Sterling and Vance collapsed with stunning speed. Faced with federal indictments and a complete freeze of their assets, the partners turned on each other, and the once prestigious firm crumbled into ruin. Mark Covington and Robert Thorne, facing decades in prison, took plea deals. They confessed to the conspiracy, detailing a multi-year scheme in which OmniChem had paid Mark millions in secret, consulting fees to ensure any and all litigation against the Riverbend plant would be neutralized. Their testimony implicated half a dozen OmniChem executives, leading to a massive wave of arrests. But for me, the victory felt hollow as long as the people of Riverbend were still suffering. The criminal case was the government's fight. My fight was for Evelyn Reed and her granddaughter. With the firm gone, the plaintiffs were in legal limbo, but not for long. Inspired by my story, pro bono offers poured in from some of the most respected environmental law firms in the country. We assembled a legal dream team. I was no longer a junior associate. I was now a central strategist, my knowledge of the case and my father's research indispensable. We refiled the case, not as a simple civil suit, but as a massive class action lawsuit backed by the full weight of the U.S. government's criminal findings. OmniChem, with its executives in jail and its darkest secret exposed to the world, had no choice but to surrender. They didn't just settle, they were forced into a landmark agreement. The settlement was the largest in the history of environmental law in the state of Washington. It included a multi-billion-dollar fund to cover the past, present, and future medical costs for every single resident of Riverbend. It paid for the complete cleanup and restoration of the Skycomish River and the surrounding wetlands. It funded an independent, long-term health monitoring program for the community. And it included a massive punitive damage award, a punishment designed to send a clear message to any other corporation that thought they could poison a community and buy their way out of it with slick lawyers and secret deals. The day the settlement was announced, I stood on the steps of the courthouse with Evelyn Reed by my side. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Her granddaughter, Chloe, stood in front of us, looking healthier than I had ever seen her, her hair starting to grow back from the chemotherapy. The crowd of Riverbend residents behind us erupted in a cheer that was a mixture of joy, relief, and decades of pent-up pain finally being released. "My husband, John, he would have loved to see this day," Evelyn whispered to me, tears streaming down her face. "He always believed that the truth, no matter how deep you bury it, will always find its way to the light. Your father believed that too." I looked out at the sea of faces, at the families who had fought for so long, and I thought of my own father, alone in the woods with his notebooks and his water vials. He had been looking for a single chemical, but he had found something more. He had found the truth, and he had passed the torch to me to carry it across the finish line. In the years that followed, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined. I didn't join another big firm. Instead, with my share of the legal fees and a grant from a foundation established in my father's name, I opened the Garcia and Reed Environmental Justice Center. Eleanor Vance, who had retired in disgust from the ruins of her old firm, became our first office manager. Dr. Eris Thorne served as our head of scientific research. We didn't take on corporate clients. We represented communities like Riverbend, small towns, indigenous tribes, and forgotten neighborhoods that were fighting their own Goliaths. We used the law not as a tool for profit, but as a shield for the powerless and a sword against the corrupt. I learned that victory isn't a single moment. It's not just about the courtroom verdict or the newspaper headline. True victory is in the slow, patient work of rebuilding what was broken. It's in the laughter of a child who can safely drink a glass of water from her own tap. It's in the return of salmon to a river that was once dead. It's in the quiet dignity of a community that refused to be silenced. Sometimes, late at night in my office, surrounded by maps and legal briefs for a new case, I think about the choice I made. The fear I felt that day in Mark's office was real. The threat to my career, to my future, was real. It would have been so much easier to stay silent, to take the path of least resistance, to trust the process. But my father taught me that the earth doesn't have a voice. And I learned that justice doesn't either. They both need advocates. They need people who are willing to stand up, even when their voice shakes, and say, "This is not right." My story is not about one lawyer or one lawsuit. It's a reminder that within each of us is the capacity for great courage. It's a call to question the systems that seem too powerful to challenge. It's proof that one person, armed with the truth and the conviction to see it through, can make a difference. The path of integrity is often the hardest one to walk, filled with risk and uncertainty. But it is the only path that leads to a world where our children can breathe clean air, drink clean water, and believe that justice is not just a word in a law book, but a living, breathing force for good. My father's legacy wasn't in those dusty boxes. It was in the fight itself. And it's a fight I am honored to continue every single day.